Hi friends, you're tuned in to Legal Means Business, a podcast by Leeway. We're joined by some amazing guests who help us identify how to take your legal function and career to the next level. I'm your host, Steph Smith, and we're talking all things legal ops and legal tech, as well as other critical skills needed to help you thrive in the evolving in-house arena. Don't forget, you can watch us on YouTube or listen on the go through Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you enjoy the conversation, please do hit subscribe and let us know what you think on social.
And I wasn't necessarily doing the best I could do, I would say. I think we were trying hard, but I think that we were not succeeding. I think that we were getting the work done, but it was really painful in terms of how the work was getting done. You have an opportunity as you build a team and develop a team to have folks work on different things and, sort of thinking hard and intentionally about making sure that folks are working on the things that give them the most energy and having conversations with folks about what gives them the most energy, I think from a work perspective is really important.
In-house legal leadership has a critical role to play for legal teams when it comes to creating positive impact within a business. But taking on a leadership role can be more difficult than you might think. And let's be honest, most of us don't like to dwell on our mistakes. But learning from times when we haven't performed at our bests is a hugely valuable resource to become better. Mark Kahn is an incredibly experienced lawyer with in-house experience with the likes of WhatsApp, Yahoo and Segment. And having taken on important leadership roles during his career, Mark's no stranger to the challenges that leadership responsibilities can present. In fact, Mark has a super refreshing take on his past experiences. And in today's episode, he openly shares the mistakes he's made as a legal leader, as well as how he went on to overcome them and thrive in his future roles. Well, hello, Mark. Lovely to have you on the podcast.
Good to be here.
We've spoken before, so I've been really looking forward to our conversation since we spoke, because your perspective and the way you reflect on your past experiences was quite refreshing. So I've been looking forward to our chat.
I'm excited. I've listened to some of your early episodes and think what you're doing is great, and I'm thrilled to be part of it.
Oh, good. I'm delighted because I know you knew Pierre from a previous life, I believe. He was on the podcast.
Yes, and he and I have stayed in touch over the years, and he's a lovely man and a tremendous leader.
Yes.
Honored to follow in his footsteps.
Amazing. Delightful. And that takes us on quite nicely, actually, because we're going to be talking all things leadership and legal leadership today. And I know that you've had a few different leadership roles in your legal career. So I guess it'd be quite nice to start with, what does leadership mean to you?
Yeah, so I think leadership is really interesting, and it's one where I think for most of my career, even as I stepped into leadership roles, I really didn't know what I was doing and didn't really think about what it meant to be a leader. And that, not surprisingly, led to some, not great outcomes, which I know we're going to talk about. But I think, what I've learned over the years, I think leadership, when you're talking about leadership and management are definitely different from one another. You can be a leader and should be a leader even if you are an individual contributor and don't have a team reporting to you. But when you're talking about leadership of a team or in a company, with respect to your team, you really need to focus on ensuring that your team feels engaged in the company, engaged in their work. They really want to be are working on things that give them energy. I think that part of that means that you have to build a trusting relationship with folks, which is not something that happens overnight. You want your team to feel like that they can talk to you about the good stuff and talk to you about the bad stuff, including, giving you feedback on how you're doing. And that all starts with building a relationship, a trust-based relationship. And again, feel like I learned some hard lessons along the way there. And I think as a leader, I had this is sort of outside the legal context, but I've been involved in youth coaching, and actually I wasn't a very good coach, but youth sports. And at one point I served on the board of Positive Coaching Alliance, which is a nonprofit in the United States. I think they've got some, I don't know if they've gone global quite yet, but it focuses on positive coaching in youth sports, and talking, as opposed to like sort of the old school reputation of coaches yelling at their kids, which is
Yeah.
something that Positive Coaching Alliance tried to get away from. But we used to talk about, meeting the kids where they're at. Like, you had this, it doesn't matter where you think your team members should be, it matters where they're at, and then helping them get from where they're at to where they want to go. And hopefully that aligns with where they need to go from the company perspective. But it's sort of like, understanding that different people will be at different places in their career and will have different skills. And so they may need more help and guidance on projects and initiatives, and it may vary depending on the project. So somebody who has a lot of experience in one area, you may just be able to sort of let them run with something. But if it's something that they're completely new to, they may need a lot more guidance. And so it's sort of that meet your teammates where they're at concept.
Yeah, I love that. I've never actually heard that, or I hate to say it, but I haven't really thought about it in that sense before, actually, because you do tend to just make assumptions or think about the end goal rather than the starting point, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think you also just think about, like, you've got somebody who on your team who, like, oh my God, they've killed everything they've ever worked on. Well, that doesn't mean, like, you throw them something completely new. Let's say, they've been working, let's say they in-house context, let's say they're a commercial deal lawyer and they've been working on transactions. And then all of a sudden you end up in an acquisition, you're getting acquired, or you're acquiring a company. That's a completely different set of skills. And they may be the most talented folks in the world, but they don't have experience in that area. And so they're going to need more guidance. And I used to worry that, like, that's going to feel like micromanaging them. But the reality is that folks, when they're sort of new to something, more guidance doesn't feel like micromanagement. It feels like you care about them and you want to see them succeed. And so, like, that was something that was not intuitive to me.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's such an interesting point, actually. So it's almost like whether or not it's micromanagement is all dependent on the context, I suppose.
Absolutely. Nobody wants to be micromanaged. I think we have different concepts of what different beliefs or understandings of what micromanagement is. I think people want autonomy. I think that's generally true. However, they don't necessarily want to be left alone if it's something that's completely foreign to them, or they feel completely at sea on. Like, then they just feel abandoned, and that very quickly leads to a deterioration of trust.
Totally. On which leadership and team dynamics are built on. So
It's all, yeah, it becomes a vicious cycle at that point.
totally. That makes sense. That makes sense. And leadership is quite a funny one as well, because obviously it is a bit of a softer skill, and it's not something that's necessarily taught in law school, for example. And you do hear some people thinking of it as a bit of a fluffy subject, but as we know, it's super important to get right. So I suppose, what are some of the misconceptions around leadership and legal leadership in particular?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. I do think it is certainly not taught in law school. There's a lot that's not taught in law school, it turns out. Uh, but I mean, I think that there's lots of books out there on leadership, and I do not profess to be extremely well read on those books. But I think the first thing that comes to mind is, finding your voice as a leader, and really sort of being, figuring out what works for you, because it's not a one size fits all. But stepping back, leadership in the in-house legal context, I think there's some unique pieces to it that make it different from leadership as a lawyer in a law firm, or leadership in another role within a tech company, or within a company, a non-tech company, that makes things a bit different. I think first off, there's a general misconception about the role of the in-house lawyer, which is that it's a one size fits all, that basically there's outside counsel and there's being at a law firm and then there's being in-house. And when you're outside counsel and you've never been in-house, I felt like I painted it with a very broad brush and said that, okay, well, in-house is like this. And the reality is that there is a much bigger difference. If you looked at the companies that I worked at over the years, Segment, WhatsApp, Evernote, Yahoo, those were all very different companies. And the differences in those companies influences the differences of what it's like to be an in-house lawyer. It's influenced by things like the size of the company, the size of the legal team. What does the company expect of legal? Are they there to, like, what substantively, what do they expect of legal? And then also, what sort of role does the company expect the lawyers to play? Are they just there to do the contracts? Are they there to be a strategic partner? I think, where does legal report into? Is it part of the exec team? Does it report into the CEO? Does it report into the CFO? And by the way, I think at least in private companies, both are workable. It's not, I think people get hung up on legal has to report to the CEO, but there are some, I've seen it work both ways.
Hmm.
Um, as you talk about leadership for in-house lawyers at tech companies, I think most tech founders, particularly the wonderkins who are maybe new and haven't worked anywhere else. They founded a company in college, or they worked at one other place and then went and founded a company. They don't really understand what legal does. And I really don't mean that as a criticism. It's just that they haven't been exposed to a general counsel or a legal department. They've probably interacted with outside counsel during company formation and funding rounds and things like that, but they don't really understand the role that a strong legal team can perform for a company. So you have to bring them along, and that's a leadership skill that you don't necessarily think about. Like, you are leading the company and you're leading the exec team and sort of understanding how the legal department can really help enable the business. I think legal is uniquely situated in that it interacts with almost every other part of the business, be it sales or marketing or engineering, product,
Hmm.
HR, finance, et cetera. And so legal is able to connect the dots in a way that can be hugely valuable for the company, that goes way beyond mitigating legal risk. And so I think that is something that you don't necessarily think about as a, legal leadership, but I think it's very important. It can be very valuable for the company, just in sort of making it in terms of enabling the business to do what it wants to do.
When you take on a leadership role, don't make assumptions. It's important to understand the role of legal leadership within the context of your specific business and your legal team. Ask yourself, what does the company expect of legal? What role does the company expect lawyers to play? Are they there just to do the contracts, or are they there to be a strategic partner? Who does legal report into, and what's important to this person? Understanding these dynamics will help you mold your leadership style to your particular circumstances and help you and your legal function create greater impact within the business. Touched on a few things that I hadn't really thought about before, like, for instance, the different contexts of the size of the business, the stage of the business that you're at, which, fundraising round you're doing, or even, for instance, a company or a legal team that's doing everything manually at some point, and then they implement legal tech that frees up a lot more resource. Their role before the legal tech and optimized processes is going to be quite significantly different than after they've implemented that and they have this newfound resource as well. So yeah, you're totally right. The way that you lead those teams and the kind of priorities of those teams will be different depending on the context.
Yeah, and I mean, I think your point on manual process is a great one, because early on, like when at an earlier stage startup where your legal team is just getting going, you're spending so much time playing whack-a-mole, basically. When you start to scale and bring in a legal operations person and you implement some legal technologies, for contract management and billing and other things like that, then you are able to. I mean, of course, there's the effort spent in getting those technologies implemented. But once you
Hmm.
do, then you're able to, devote time to other things. And of course, that makes it sound much easier than it actually is. There's always whack-a-mole that happens, particularly at a startup. But I think that's a great point that you've made.
Yeah, totally. And then I suppose the second point that you made that I hadn't really thought about was we often think about legal leadership in terms of leading the legal team. But, what role does legal leadership play for the wider business? It's not solely about leading it's not people management, as you mentioned. It's different. It's a different game.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think that, and this gets into the role of the lawyer in-house. I mean, you're playing a, yes, you wear that legal hat and you provide counsel to the company on, contracts and intellectual property and employment, HR issues, all of those things. But you're also wearing a business hat, in particular, as a general counsel or a senior member of the leadership team, or a member of the senior leadership team, I should say. You were expected to weigh in and help guide the business. I found as a lawyer, though, you definitely want to pick your spots, because you don't want to be you don't want to get a reputation of being the lawyer who's always, weighing in on business issues somewhat gratuitously. So I think, but it is part of your job to help guide the company in ways that may not always be right down the middle of the fairway, as they say, for legal. It's more about the business.
Yeah, totally. And I suppose that takes a bit of almost building your reputation within the business. As you say, you don't want to be seen as someone who chimes in eh,
Uh,
unnecessarily
yeah,
at
and
every point.
I think, like, for me, it was like during that first 6 months of being at a place, and this was true whether I was a more of a individual contributor, more junior lawyer in house, or sitting in the general counsel's chair. The first 6 months, I tended to do a lot more listening and really had to sort of guard against weighing in too soon and too frequently, because I was just trying to learn, and that was hard for me because, as you probably gathered, I do like to talk. So that, but like being in meetings, just, I remember, I don't know, back at Evernote, and I was there. It was just me and the general counsel, it was just the two of us, and I would be in meetings with the product team, and it would, I was just really trying to listen, because I didn't want to, you didn't want to be excluded from conversation. So at that point, early on, you're just happy to be learning about the business. And there were times that I would speak up, but I tried to be really selective, both in on what I spoke up about, and also how, because like in a meeting of 10 or 12 people, may not be that, like, I have some questions, or I have some concerns. Okay, don't raise them there, but, hey, go talk to the person that knows the most about this, and make them aware, and talk about it in a one-on-one situation, because then it's like you're not going on a what could be a sort of a detour and spending valuable time talking about something that really may not be an issue, or needs to be drilled down on outside of the context of a big meeting.
Yeah, totally. And I suppose thinking about your experience, you have some pretty interesting experience when it comes to legal leadership, I would say. And in particular, perhaps when you were at WhatsApp, how did you end up in a leadership role at WhatsApp, and what was that like?
Yeah, so I joined WhatsApp sort of in the middle of the acquisition by Facebook. It had been announced, but hadn't yet closed. And so this was in the middle of 2014. I was the second attorney there. And so, I was reporting to the general counsel. And when I joined, I don't know that I had an expectation that I would, one way or the other. Honestly, I was a little naive in joining, in the sense that I didn't realize really how fast WhatsApp was growing. I mean, I understood that Facebook was paying a very large amount of money for WhatsApp. So, but I didn't really think about what that would mean for growth of the legal team. And so it just sort of happened naturally, very quickly. We decided that we needed somebody else to come in, and started to build out the team. And, because I was brought in to deal with sort of product counseling and commercial transactions, and a lot of the areas where we were going to need more help, it was just sort of obvious that as we built out the team, that some folks would end up reporting to me pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and because it was quite organic, I suppose you wouldn't have had an opportunity or thought about or actively thought about your leadership style. So, what was your default leadership style at that time?
I don't think I had one, honestly. I mean, I certainly wasn't intentionally thinking about it. It had been a long time since I had people directly reporting to me. In fact, let me think about that. I don't think as a lawyer, I really had people directly reporting to me, other than interns from time to time. But like, in terms of full-time
Mm-hmm.
folks and permanent hires, I don't think I'd had people reporting to me in several years, probably even going back, maybe really not even until before law school. And so I didn't really think about what my leadership style would be. And part of that, I mean, we were so busy that there was just so much work coming in. It was just all about getting the work done. And so, for a while, it was just the three of us. I had hired one person, and then there was a general counsel, me, and the one person I had hired. And I think we were so busy getting the work done. I think it worked okay. I can't speak for the person who was reporting to me, but I think it worked okay for that first year, despite my lack of really developed thesis on leadership.
Yeah, totally. So it was kind of the three of you in the legal team at that point, and what were the dynamics like if you were just trying to get the work done?
I mean, I think it was we were fully in that, even though we had been acquired by Facebook. By the time the third person started, we had been acquired by Facebook, and so we were starting to interact with Facebook on a more regular basis. However, for the first 2 years post acquisition, we were operating pretty independently. We were on our own campus. We were, part of the broader Facebook legal team, but we really operated quite independently. And Facebook legal and Facebook more generally was there as a resource for us, but it wasn't, it was more, we would come to them when we needed help, and they would occasionally come to us when they needed our help, but it wasn't a fully integrated situation. So I think that at that point, the team that we were in full on startup mode is what I would say. And so we were close with each other. We were working hard. We were getting a lot of stuff done. Yeah, I mean, it felt like every month, this is a bit of an exaggeration, but it was like every quarter we would grow, another 100 million users would be added. Which was, we'd go from, it was 400 million, then it was 500 million, 600 million. Pretty soon we were at 1 billion users. And so we were just so focused on enabling that. I think it was going well, or well enough, I would say. There was no obvious issues going on.
Yeah.
I think as go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no, on you. I was just going to say, yeah, I imagine it happens to quite a lot of in-house lawyers, particularly in startups, as you say, that you don't necessarily have this intention to actively seek out this leadership role, but naturally as the company grows and you have to hire more lawyers or those who have no legal degree as well for the legal team, you just naturally have to take on that role.
Yeah, and you're focused on getting stuff done,
Mhm.
and that works to a point, or can work. Probably not the best way of doing it, but you're just so focused on the day to day that I think where I was failing was in it was my relationship with folks on my team was very transactional, is how I would describe it. We were very focused, like we would do one-on-ones and things like that. And I really wasn't thinking about like, hey, how are you doing? And like, are you working on stuff that's interesting to you? It was more just like, okay, where are we on this? Where we are on that? Where we are on that?
Mhm.
And, it wasn't, when we were small, it wasn't, I think it was, planting the seeds for sort of future challenges, but it didn't manifest itself as a huge issue because we naturally were developing a relationship, a good working relationship, just because we were interacting with each other so much. I think as the team started to grow, and now you're sort of fast forwarding late 2015 and into 2016, and so we're 2 years into the acquisition now, that and the team started to grow, the sort of lack of intentionality in talking with folks and really sort of understanding what motivates them, what they were interested in, making sure that they were getting to work on things that gave them energy. I
Mhm.
wasn't doing any of that, and where I was still in that sort of transactional mode. And so folks, I think I'm putting words in people's mouths. I think folks didn't feel like I cared more about the work getting done than I cared about the people,
Mhm.
which wasn't true, but I understand. But if I were in their shoes, that's probably how I would have felt.
Being a leader means being strategic. It's about finding the balance between getting the work done effectively and helping your team stay motivated for sustainable success. To find this balance, start by being more intentional with how you distribute work within your team. Ask your team what motivates them. understand what topics they're interested in and where they would like to develop their skills. What tasks give them energy and what work demotivates them. Understanding this and distributing legal work in line with these motivations means your legal team will function more effectively while also maintaining high levels of motivation and satisfaction. And what exactly happened to make you realize, that in your words, you were failing the team from a leadership perspective?
I don't think I realized it until it was too late, in the sense that, so, if you go now late into 2016, WhatsApp was made the decision, Facebook and WhatsApp made the decision for WhatsApp to share certain data back with Facebook, not texts of conversations or chats, but metadata. And of course, that ended up creating all sorts of regulatory interest from data protection authorities in Europe and around the world. So at that point, things just got incredibly busy with and our with investigations, and we were interacting with data protection authorities around the world. And I received some, some pretty pointed feedback from my boss about like that things weren't really getting done the way they needed to get done. And I sort of took that as I certainly got defensive, I will tell you that. Because I was like, well, we're really busy. We're doing the best we can, and I don't know that we were actually building. I don't know that we were actually doing. I wasn't necessarily doing the best I could do, I would say. I think we were trying hard, but I think that we were not succeeding. I think that we were getting the work done, but it was really painful in terms of how the work was getting done. We all felt overworked, and people were, I don't know the quality. I don't know how the quality of work. I think we ultimately got there in terms of producing high quality work, but it was just really painful to get there. And I think that my view on that was just that, well, this is just how these things go. And I think that was naive and wrong, frankly. That was, it goes back to the sort of the lack of trust that really existed, that I had failed to build up with my
Mm.
team because I hadn't really focused on building relationships. And so in early, I think it was, I can't remember, it was early 2017, I want to say it was. And my boss made the decision to move me back to an individual contributor role and not have me lead the team,
Mm.
which took me by surprise, but shouldn't have taken me by surprise. Like I was both sort of objectively, like if you look at the sort of how the team was operating, it wasn't operating great. And then also, like, I think my boss had given me feedback that I wasn't doing what I needed to do. And I think I was probably way too dismissive of that feedback.
It's such a valuable story to hear, though, because we do hear from people who are flying the flag for building relationships in business and things, and but hearing the story of the trigger moment where you realize, no, it really is important. It has a lot of oomph behind it, I think.
Yeah, and let me be clear. Like when I got moved back to the individual contributor role and was no longer leading a team, I didn't realize it at that point, the importance of relationships. It was not till well after I'd left WhatsApp that I really began to grok that.
And that's quite a good segue, actually. So, you ended up leaving WhatsApp, and then I suppose your next role in Segment. What was your role like in Segment, and what did you do differently?
Yeah, so let me tell you about the first thing that I did after I left WhatsApp, which was I took time off. I had decided I was really burned out at that point. I was in no shape to go be a lawyer somewhere else or really and really work anywhere else at that point. And I decided I would take 3 to 6 months off, and if it became a year, I was okay with that. Now I recognize that not everybody can do that. There are different, for lots of reasons, people may not be able to do that. I was in the fortunate position of being able to do that. I spent the first 3 months not even thinking about what my next job was going to be. I was like, I don't even know if I still want to be a lawyer. That's how exhausted I was and how, like I said, burned out. In early 2018, I decided that I still wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to go be the first lawyer at a startup. I've always gravitated towards startups. I'd never been the first lawyer. I wanted to go build it from scratch. So I started talking with Segment. It was literally the first company I talked to. And I wasn't really expecting to go end up in the role at Segment, but I started talking with folks and really liked the people. The product resonated with me, the stage of the company, it just all came together. During the interview process, I talked with Peter, Segment CEO, and I said, like, look, I made some mistakes in leadership at WhatsApp. And I don't want to repeat those mistakes. I'm sure I'll make different mistakes, but I don't want to make those same mistakes again. And so I would love to work with an executive coach to help me, be a better leader. And Peter, it just so happened, he was like, "Oh, I've worked with 4 coaches over the years. I think that's great, and I would absolutely support that. Company will pay for it. Yeah, and that's awesome." And so not a few months in, I sort of got in and waited a few months until I began to get a sense of what the department was like, or it wasn't a department, but what the company was like before connecting with a coach. I talked with a bunch of coaches. I ended up working with a coach, and one of the things that we spent a lot of time was talking about the importance of trusting relationships, and which is sort of obvious as you say it out loud, but I don't think it was obvious to me at the time. But the way I sort of operationalized that as when I began to build out the team, and we started building out the team very quickly. I had expected to come into Segment and really sort of sit back and observe for about 6 months and then start building out the team. I was there for all of 6 weeks, and I was like, I need help. And the company was completely supportive. And so I started in March. But I think we posted the job by mid-May, and the person was on board by July, August. And then we hired another person, a legal operations person, a few months after that. So by the end of the year, we'd gone from 0 to 3 people by the end of the year. The coach helped me, sort of think through, like, okay, what do I want my leadership style to be like? And, I realized that one thing I definitely had not done in the past was talk with folks about making sure they were working on what gave them energy. And so I started doing career conversations with people, but not in a sort of like, oh, twice a year we're going to talk about your career, but more just organically that, because we were growing fast. The company as a whole was adding, revenue and headcount were both, basically doubling, every, I don't know, 18 months or something like that. We went from 200 people when I joined in 2018 to by the time we got acquired, we were 2.5 years later, we were approaching 600 people. So it was very fast growth. The legal team over that period went from just me to 8 people by the end, by the time of the acquisition. And because we had so much work, we also had resources. Like we were, we were empowered to go bring in outside counsel, bring in contractors, hire additional people. But when you're at that stage, when you go from 1 person to 2 person to 3 person to 4, every new full-time employee is an opportunity to make sure that folks are working on stuff that they really want to work on. And so, and have the right mix of things. So as like new things would come in the door, be like, okay, is that something you want to work on? Is that something that interests you? Yeah, that's interesting to me. Okay, well, what can we take off your plate? Because it can't be just constantly piling on. And this is where okay, well, now we're going to hire another full-time person. Do we hire a person who's a commercial expert, or do we hire a privacy expert or something like that? And it's the thing about startups is that you really want folks at the early stage, and I'll define early stage in this case is when your legal team is, no more than maybe 5 to 10 people. You really have a bunch of generalists and folks you're not going to have like, okay, I have my IP, a person who just does IP, a person who just does employment. You really want you have a bunch of generalists. And that's what they gravitate towards. They want that variety of things. And so when new stuff comes in, like it's sort of they get excited to take on that new thing. It may be a little bit scary to them, but it's not something that they chose a startup for a reason, which is they like that diversity of work. And so but I think as you think about growing the legal team, what I thought about is as sort of having centers of gravity for folks. Like this person is basically going to be doing commercial stuff. Okay, but now we've got some product counseling or some trademark work that comes in. Yeah, they're going to pick that up. It may not be in their center of gravity, but it's something they want to learn about. Or export control is another issue, or another substantive area, employment, whatever. And so allowing folks the opportunity to go develop skills in other areas, but do it in a way that they're not, it can't all be, it goes back to what I said before, it can't all be adding to their plate.
And you touched on something interesting there as well around how you didn't enforce these career conversations or these type of conversations as a strict, almost development business thing. It happened organically, and you kind of ensured that. How important do you feel that is? Because I mean, I know how I feel from a personal perspective on the difference between
Uh,
organic versus enforced.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the enforced part is still important. Like, I think during we did performance reviews twice a year, and we would
Hmm.
still talk about it in performance reviews, but it was more just like it was a continuation or an extension or a formalization of the conversations that were happening on a very regular basis. And sometimes it was in one-on-ones, but sometimes it was just like, hey, this new thing has come in, is this something that you would want to work on? And I made sure people, like one of the things you have to be really careful about is making sure that people understand that when I say, is this something you would want to work on? It really is an option for you to work on it. It's not a command. You're not going to be downgraded, or
Yeah.
it's not going to be negative if you say, nah, I'm not really interested in that. But creating that sort of, I'll use the phrase safe space, but really making sure that people feel comfortable and empowered to say, you know what, I'm going to take a pass on that one. But I think it's both. You want to have the conversations organically. You still want to have the structured conversations,
Hmm.
but that should be a natural follow on to the unstructured conversations that are happening organically.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there, because I think when you have this opportunity to speak about these things more organically and more on an ongoing basis and in real time when things are coming in, as you say, or you're experiencing something, that's when it really kind of hits home and you're thinking about it authentically, rather than solely speaking about it twice a year, having to dig deep to remember, for instance. So yeah, I think that's a
Yeah,
great
yeah, that's
approach.
right. That's right. And yeah, and I feel like I don't know, I think it just feels austere a little bit if you're doing it in just that sort of forced way. Let me also say one other thing about this is that selfishly, I discovered that I really enjoy those career conversations that I was having with people with my team, and talking about like what gives them energy, because I was learning things about folks, and I was just really it allowed me to try to help them think about like, okay, what do they want to do now to sort of as they think about longer term, and then I'm not to, what are the skills they want to develop and how can we develop it? And I found myself getting an unexpected and surprising level of energy out of those conversations.
Having ongoing career conversations with your team can boost morale and speed up professional development. While, yes, you will have more formal performance reviews once or twice a year, it's also good to have a regular informal feedback loop, so you can draw on these insights to provide your team with the work that will keep them engaged and upskill them in areas that they're interested in. To do so, make a point of having these informal chats with each team member. And when work comes in, think about who would best benefit from it, while still getting the work done to a high standard. Exactly. And I suppose so now that you've come out the other end, and whether either now or when you were at segment, things are going much better from a leadership perspective, I suppose. What were the key lessons that you learned from both your more challenging experience at WhatsApp and then to your more positive experience in terms of leadership at segment?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the number one thing is, I mentioned trust and relationships, and people toss those buzzwords around, toss them around as those words around as buzzwords a lot. But I think really focusing on understanding what folks on your team want to do, and there's always going to be projects that nobody really wants to do. Or, but as a general matter, like you have an opportunity as you build a team and develop a team to have folks work on different things and, sort of thinking hard and intentionally about making sure that folks are working on the things that give them the most energy and having conversations with folks about what gives them the most energy. I think from a work perspective is really important. I think the other thing, which I definitely paid short shrift to, what or gave short shrift to was, just the knowing, knowing your team on a personal level, an individual level, like, what's going on in their lives, how are they doing, and particularly in sort of an all remote environment, that becomes even more critical. Like,
Definitely.
what's going well, what's not going so well. And, some people will want to talk more about their personal lives than others do, and sort of making space for that. Like, you don't want to be invasive and sort of prying, but make sure that folks feel comfortable talking to you about how their mental well-being is and things like that. I think is really important, because when you are in those tough work situations, that folks feel like you sort of understand them as a whole person, and not you are interested far more in not just in their sort of how they are doing at work, but like how are they doing overall, and are they enjoying what they're doing.
Totally. And they are, as much as we'd like them not to be. Our personal lives and our work lives are intertwined, and one impacts the other
Absolutely.
more than we'd like to admit, perhaps. And I suppose in terms of you mentioned you really enjoy working for startups, or that's what you were looking for after WhatsApp. So how important is it that leaders are engaged in their specific roles?
I, I think, yeah. So it's funny you should ask it in that way. I hadn't really thought about it in that way in particular, but I've come to the view that it's really in society. I think we are conditioned to seek the bigger job at the better company, and I think folks need to resist that urge. People need to think very intentionally about, okay, is this job the right job for me, and is the company the right company for me given where I am in my life and what else is on in my life. Work is one part of everyone's lives. It may be a very important part, but it's not the only part. And thinking, I think, very carefully about, what is it I want to do? How does work fit into that? And what do I want my job to look like? And because we do, as lawyers, we do have it's very easy just to kind of go with the flow and just or go apply for the job at the bigger company that is more prestigious and more salary and more equity and more title and all of that. But I think that's how you end up in a role that may not be the right one for you at that time.
And I suppose if you're in a leadership role, you've touched on it a little bit, but I guess what were your lessons around communication and kind of clarity over different communication styles with your team or the rest of the business?
Yeah, so it's this is one where I think I was better in theory than in practice on. Like, I think you want it's important for leaders to understand how their team members like to be communicated with, and also articulate how they like to be communicated with. And what I mean by that is like, I mean, so much, particularly nowadays, gets done over email or Slack or even text message or WhatsApp or whatever. And that can, depending on the person, that can create some stress. So and so I think I would, and I think I did this even throughout my career, even at Segment. I don't think I was paying enough attention to this, which is like, if I send an email over the weekend, I have no expectation that the person will read the email or respond to it. But I don't think I was actually paying enough attention to the fact that, hey, the general counsel is sending an email to one of his direct reports. That person may feel obligated to respond, and that's not what I wanted. But you have to put yourself in the position of the person receiving the message, and I think our CEO kind of felt the same way. Like, and if I got an email from the CEO, like, it didn't create stress for me, but at the same time, I did end up, wanting to respond
Mm-hmm.
over the weekend or whatever. And so I think understanding from folks like how don't not create stress needlessly by, and making sure that talking with folks about, again, open communications, talking with them about communication issues. And this may seem really sort of down in the weeds, but it's that stuff that's down in the weeds that actually can materially affect job satisfaction and happiness.
Yeah, totally. I'm seeing more and more people put in their email signatures things like, I work outside typical working hours sometimes. Please, I don't expect you to respond out with outside of your tradition typical working hours. So I think, yeah, things like
Yeah,
that can
which I
be.
think is, I think it's good, but it also, like, that can become a crutch. Well, I said in my email that you don't need to respond, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's a good thing to do that,
Yeah,
but I think people still need to be
it's a culture, isn't it?
careful. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that's right.
yeah, exactly. You need to kind of build that so that they know whether or not it's true.
Yes.
Which
Yeah.
thankfully in most cases it is true. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's just giving that confidence. And then you also, just as a bit of a last point, you did touch on a little bit as well about well-being. How important is it to be thinking about well-being as a legal leader, and what should you be thinking about?
I mean, I think it's at the very top of the list. If you, and well-being includes yourself, if you and members of your team are struggling with whatever, then then that's going to lead to burnout, and that's going to lead to ultimately people not being able to do their jobs or quitting or whatever. I think it's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day craziness of what needs to get done, but you need to take time as a leader to get to know your folks and ask them how they are doing. And if they aren't doing so great, figuring out how to help them. And again, different people will need different types of support. It's important to remember that this doesn't, like, you can't just go, oh, how are you doing, and expect to get a straight answer. This is a byproduct. Having those open conversations and people feeling comfortable telling you how they are doing is a byproduct of a trusting relationship that has been built because you have invested in developing the relationship.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I love it. Well, it's so refreshing to hear someone speak so constructively around an experience that was, I guess, slightly more negative out of your entire career, I suppose. So thank you for your honesty and your humility and your vulnerability, which I suppose are all things that we should be taking into our leadership styles as well, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think just one final point on that. Like,
Hmm.
I was always scared about being vulnerable, and I think one thing I did at Segment was to be really transparent with folks about my past struggles, where I kind of fell
Hmm.
at WhatsApp, and also as I was struggling with stuff at Segment. And I think this was important because it gave my team permission to not be perfect themselves and made them more willing to tell me when they were struggling with something. And so I mean, like, look, we're all, it's trite, but we're all human. We're not going to do everything perfectly. And I think the more people are open about where they've had missteps, I think the better it is for everyone.
Yeah, completely agree. Absolutely, completely agree. Super valuable lessons that you've walked us through, and I'm sure everyone will benefit from these kind of stories. And like you say, hopefully more and more people will become comfortable sharing their more vulnerable stories, because we all have them. Nobody's perfect, as you say.
That's
So
right.
yeah, much appreciated you sharing them. So thank you so much for joining us. I don't know if you have.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it was a pleasure, and I great questions, and I love our conversation.
Oh, yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, really, really appreciate it. Super important conversation. And hopefully some more people will join us and share their lessons learned from the hard times. So yeah, thank you.
I look forward to it.